Alright, we are almost done for the day. And as I have mentioned, we are on time with our topics. And if we finish Article 14 and 15 today, that will be very good. 14. At least 14. Alright, those are the aggravating circumstances. Page 1. Number 2, felonies. A, B, C, D. Letter F. Letter F. Multiple offenders. Differences, rules, and effects. I am afraid this should not be multiple offenders, but multiple crimes. Multiplicity of crimes. Hindi ba? Bakit naman multiple offenders? Recidivism, habituality, quasi-recidivism.
Kaya naman, multiple offenders yung nakalagay, no?
Okay. Let us see. Aggravating circumstances. Let us start with the common aggravating circumstances. Taking advantage of public office. This is a special aggravating circumstance class, which is also amended and included in Article 62, Paragraph 1. 62, Paragraph 1. Included therein is the matter of a syndicate when there is an organized, when there is an organization, or when there are two or more persons organized for the purpose of committing a crime, there is a syndicate. Note that this is a special aggravating circumstance which cannot be offset by a mitigating circumstance. The mere fact class that the accused used his firearm to commit a crime, service firearm, does not constitute abuse of public office. Because the accused can commit the crime even with the use of other firearms, not necessarily his service firearm. When the facts of the case does not show that the accused used his public office to facilitate the commission of the crime, it is not aggravating. It is not aggravating. So, when a policeman uses his public office in order to gain entry inside the house, then public office is an aggravating circumstance. Contempt against a public authority or commission of a crime in the presence of a public authority. Take note that if the contempt against the public authority would constitute a crime, it is not aggravating pursuant to Article 62, Paragraph 1 and Paragraph 2. Paragraph 1 and Paragraph 2 of Article 62 defines when a certain aggravating circumstance is inherent or necessarily included in the definition of the crime. So, if the offender push the public officer. Who is the public officer in the contempt against the public authority? The person involved here is a is not an agent of a person in authority, but must be a person in authority. Hence, if a policeman is the one involved, there is no contempt, but it must be a person in authority. As decided by the Supreme Court, the chief of police is a person in authority. So, if the accused push the mayor or a judge push and committed the crime, notice that it is not merely aggravating. The contempt is not merely aggravating, but it becomes a crime of resistance. Worse, if he slapped the face of the chief of police so that he could commit the crime, there may amount to a crime of direct assault, in which case there is not simply an aggravating circumstance of commission of a crime in contempt of a public authority. That would constitute as a separate offense. Okay, contempt against a public authority. Ban should be distinguished with the aid of armed men. Ban, remember class, is not a qualifying aggravating circumstance. If you will look at your article 248, it is the aid of armed men which is an qualifying aggravating circumstance. So, if there are four armed malefactor who participated in the commission of the offense, what would be the appropriate aggravating circumstance? If you will say there is a ban, then homicide will be committed. But if you will say aid of armed men, the accused will be liable for the crime of murder qualified by the aid of armed men. That is one distinction there. But how will you now classify whether it is aid of armed men or committed by a ban? If these four armed men class acted together or they are in conspiracy, then they form a ban. In which case, if they take advantage of their strength as a ban, then there is a ban as well as abuse of superior strength. On the other hand, if they did not participate together in the commission of the crime, but this form armed malefactor merely aided the principal in the commission of the crime, this armed malefactor would constitute armed men, and the aggravating circumstance would be aid of armed men, and this aid of armed men, the armed men will be liable only as an accomplice. Alright? So, it is necessary, class, to take the facts under a certain problem to determine whether there is a ban or there is an aid of armed men. In case of doubt, lesser liability, which is that of an accomplice, aid of armed men. Okay? Ban does not absorb superior strength. Why? Superior strength involves the taking advantage of the strength of the offender, regardless of whether or not they form a band. There may be 2 or even 3 individuals involved. If they are more superior than the victim, then it is an aggravating circumstance, even if they are less than 4. But even if they are more than 4, if they did not take advantage of their superior strength, there is no abuse of superior strength. But there may be a ban if there are all malefactors who participated in the commission of the crime. Nighttime. Madali na yan. Kaya na ninyo. Nighttime. Note the objective and subjective test. Objective, it facilitated the commission of the crime. Subjective, it was purposely adopted by the accused. In either case, class, it will aggravate the commission of the crime. Either case, whether it facilitated or taken advantage of, that will be an aggravating circumstance. Uninhabited place, it is not the place, the presence of houses in the place where the crime is committed to test whether a place is uninhabited or not. That is despoblado in Spanish. Despoblado. Samantalang yung band is cuadrilla. Cuadrilla. In despoblado class, even if there are houses in the vicinity, that may still be considered as a desolate place if the people in those houses cannot afford or cannot provide help or succor to the victims. In one case, the houses, there are houses indeed, but there are trees that block the vision of the inhabitants or occupants of the house, so that they could not possibly see they could not possibly see the commission of the crime, and they could not possibly render some help to a victim of a crime. Alright. Even if there are no houses, on the other hand, even if there are no houses, but there is a possibility, great possibility, that a victim of a crime could be helped, it is not considered despoblado. As for instance, it is a place where people usually pass or congregate. People usually congregate or they pass that place. Okay, that is not considered as despoblado because of the possibility of help to the offended or to the victims of crimes. Okay. Dwelling. Alam niyo na yan. You know this. Exclusive for dwelling purposes. If it is partly used as a commercial purpose, you have surrendered the sanctity of your house. Why? Because when it is used for commercial purposes, you open your house to the public. You open your house to the public, and therefore, that sanctity of exclusivity in your own dwelling cannot be invoked. If the crime commenced inside the house, although the crime was consummated outside the house, dwelling is still aggravating. However, if it commenced outside the house and ended inside the house, there is no dwelling as an aggravating circumstance. Why? Because this violation of dwelling was not purposely done. It was not intentionally done by the accused, because it was only incidental that the victim went inside the house when the accused commenced the commission of the crime. Dwelling does not require ownership of the house. Any person, for that matter, who sleeps in another house, that person is entitled to the sanctity of a home as part of his dwelling whenever a crime is committed against him. A house composed of several rooms occupied by different occupants, like a dormitory, is considered as a separate dwelling, so that the people inside that dormitory, consisting of several rooms, each room would constitute the dwelling of another person. A crime committed therein by a dormitory, how do you call that? How do you call the people inside the dormitories? Sige. Those people inside, although they belong in the same house, They have separate rooms and each room constitute their dwelling. So, a co-occupant of the house, who commits a crime in that particular room may still be aggravated by dwelling. Dwelling class is not aggravating in robbery. Robbery with force upon things. But it is aggravating in robbery with force and intimidation against person. Some people would forget this distinction. Sabi nila, dwelling robbery, that is inherent. You should distinguish what kind of robbery. Whether it is force upon things or intimidation against person. Place of the crime, other places considered aggravating, alright. Place of worship, Malacanang Palace, in the presence of the chief executive. Place of public functionary, when it is required that there should be a public function that is ongoing to be aggravating. In place of worship, note class that it is inherent in violation of Article 133, offending the religious feeling, because that is one of the requisites for purposes of violation of Article 133. And this place of worship should be a public place of worship. It excludes a private chapel. Kasi some of you here who are wealthy enough, affluent enough, and can afford to build their own private chapel in their houses, crime committed therein is not aggravated by place of worship, because the place of worship contemplated by Article 14 is a public place of worship. Let us go to a more important aggravating circumstance. Treachery. This is a specific aggravating circumstance. When we say specific, applicable only to particular crimes. Just like rank, sex, and age, applicable only to crimes against persons or honor. So that if the crime is robbery with homicide, can against an old woman, a congresswoman, senile old woman, may it be appreciated as an aggravating circumstance if that old congresswoman was robbed and killed? The answer is no, because the crime is crime against property under Title 10. You see, Title 10. And it is not a crime against person. However, in robbery with homicide, the Supreme Court applied the appreciation of treachery as an aggravating circumstance, generic in character. People versus Escote explained why, despite the fact that robbery with homicide is a crime against property, treachery was appreciated as a generic aggravating circumstance because of the presence of the composite crime of homicide, which the law looks upon as an offense that would be aggravated by treachery, although only as a generic aggravating circumstance. You will note that there is no such thing as robbery with murder. So the treachery will not aggravate or will not constitute as a qualifying aggravating circumstance. The accused was killed suddenly and unexpected manner. Is there treachery? He was not afforded any opportunity to defend himself because it was done in a sudden and unexpected manner. Is there aggravating circumstance of treachery? Meron? The answer is no. It is not enough, class, that there is a sudden and unexpected attack that would deprive the accused from the opportunity to defend himself. There are two requisites of treachery. Take note. The subjective and objective element. What is the objective element? Alright. The objective element, class, is the mode that is adopted. What is that mode? Sudden and unexpected attack. Objective element. Is this enough? No. Because it must be coupled with the subjective element. What is this subjective element? Deliberate adoption by the accused. So, not because there is sudden and unexpected attack, if it cannot be shown that it was deliberately adopted by the accused, there is no treachery. Kaya sabi ng Supreme Court, to prove treachery, the prosecution must show the initial or commencement of the attack and show to the court how the attack progressed. Alright, initial. And under jurisprudence, that treachery must exist at the inception or at the very beginning of the commission of the crime. It cannot be during the commission of the crime. Why? Because it was purposely adopted. And if it is purposely adopted, at the start, right there and then, there must be treachery. Otherwise, if it occurred during a continuous aggression, like for instance, there was a quarrel between A and B, and then B ran away from his aggressor, Mr. A. A chased Mr. B. In the course of the chase, B tripped, face downward. Alright. And at this very moment, the accused A took advantage of that situation where the victim fell downward and stabbed the victim from behind without any opportunity of the offended party or victim to defend himself. Is there treachery? There is none. Bakit? Because that mode of attack, although sudden and unexpected, was not deliberately adopted. It was only incidental. It was incidental or accidental? Ano ba tama? It was only accidental that the victim tripped to the ground, in which case the accused took advantage. It was not purposely adopted, in other words. This is a continuous aggression. And again, I repeat, treachery must or should exist at the commencement of the attack. Nonetheless, class, if the aggression is not continuous, as it could be divided into two stages, treachery may be appreciated if it occurs at the time when the fatal blow was inflicted. Meaning that there should be two stages of the aggression. For instance, let us take the same facts where there was a quarrel and then the victim ran away from the accused. And the victim was able to hide inside a closet so that there is no continuity of the attack. The accused stopped the aggression because he couldn't find the victim who was hiding in a closet. And after a certain period or lapse of time, the accused was able to determine where the victim was hiding, and therein he deliberately adopted a means in order to ensure the killing of the victim, hiding inside the closet, and fired upon the closet knowing the exact position of the victim. Is there treachery? The answer is yes. There is now treachery because notice there are two stages of the commission of the crime, and in that second stage there was a lapse of time from the first stage. What is the significance of the lapse of time from the first aggression and the second aggression? The significance of the lapse of time is for the offender to deliberately adopt a means or method to ensure the commission of the crime without affording the victim any opportunity to defend himself. Without that lapse of time, there could be no treachery. There could be no basis to prove the deliberate adoption of the method adopted by the accused. Treachery clause is a catch-all provision. What do I mean catch-all provision? It absorbs any means or method adopted by the accused to ensure the commission of the crime without any defense from the victim. What are these methods that may constitute also a separate aggravating circumstance? What are these? Alright. The employment of a band, the employment of the aid of barman, the employment of the abuse of superior strength, the employment of craft, fraud, and disguise, the employment of nighttime, the employment of a means in order to weaken the defense. All of this mode or method adopted, which may constitute also as an aggravating circumstance, as a rule, is always absorbed, as a rule, is absorbed by treachery. Because this is the mode which is purposely adopted. The accused purposely adopted nighttime darkness to ensure the commission of the crime without any defense. He employed the abuse of superior strength. However, class, if these aggravating circumstances normally absorbed by treachery could be appreciated independently because there is a circumstance distinct and separate from the basis of treachery, then two or more aggravating circumstances may be appreciated. As for instance, in one case, where the accused took advantage of the nighttime to abduct the victim, and after abducting the victim, he brought the victim in a secluded place, and thereat he tied the victim and killed the victim before throwing the victim to the river. Alright. You will notice, class, that the basis of nighttime is the abduction of the victim, which is separate from the treachery adopted when the victim was executed without any defense. Under this circumstance, notice, there will be no absorption, but two aggravating circumstances independent from each other will be appreciated. Killing a minor 13 below is always attended by treachery because of the weakness of the child who cannot put up a defense against an adult offender. Against an adult offender. Treachery. Iba yung trickery from treachery. Kasi, the aggravating circumstance is trickery. Although trickery may be a method that is adapted. Minsan, even later on when you will teach also criminal law, nakakatawa ang sagot ng mga bata. Trickery, sasabihin nila, is similar to treachery. There was one example when I gave regarding a balut vendor who was selling his merchandise at about 12 o'clock. He was called upon by the offenders, and then they made fun of him and they killed the balut vendor. And one of the question is the aggravating circumstance of nighttime. And one of the students, my students said, nighttime is inherent because balut selling is only done during nighttime, and therefore it is inherent to the commission of the crime. My goodness. And when I discussed the answer and then cited that kind of answer that it is inherent, I asked who answered this, and then the student readily raised it, and I am the one, sir, who gave that answer. All right, treachery class does not absorb evident premeditation. Why? Because evident premeditation does not relate to the means, method, or forms done by the accused to ensure the commission of the crime. Evident premeditation has something to do with the greater perversity of the accused, that after coolly reflecting the consequences of his crime, still he committed the offense. Kaya nga, evident premeditation, because the accused premeditated, reflected the consequences of the crime. Hence, the necessity of a lapse of time from the criminal resolution until the clinging or commission of the crime resolved to be committed. Notice the requisite first. Kaya napakahirap mag-prove ng evident premeditation eh. It's difficult because of these elements. One, the time when the accused resolved to commit a crime. Offenders do not tell in public that they will commit a crime. They will just commit it. See? So how can you prove that there was a prior resolution? Oh, see? Of course, if there are some witnesses who saw the accused meditating and resolving to commit a crime. Alright. And second element, the accused clung to his criminal determination, meaning that he had committed the crime which he had resolved. Otherwise, if it was a different crime, wala ang premeditation. And the most important is the lapse of time. Why? Because the lapse of time will determine the perversity of the accused, that despite the cool reflection, still he insisted to commit the crime. Yung isa, nagdasal, he prayed the rosary overnight, and then the following day he committed the crime. Is there evident premeditation? Of course, yes. Kasi humihingi na ng kapatawaran dun sa taas. And despite knowing that it is wrong, he committed the crime. Alright. What time is sufficient that would lapse? Meron? Wala. There is no fixed standard. It will depend on the crime committed. Of course, the more serious crime is committed, the longer meditation is necessary. Although the Supreme Court, in one case, decided that 1 hour is sufficient. But that 1 hour plus is only applicable pro hac vice in that particular case. Do not apply it as a general rule. In one case, the accused resolved to commit murder, to kill Pedro. I will kill Pedro. And indeed, he went to the house of Pedro and told Pedro, Pedro, come down, I will kill you. Pedro did not go down. So, the accused stayed in the house, walking and shouting around the house of Pedro, telling Pedro to come down. For 4 hours, paikot-ikot yan at nagsisigaw, telling Pedro to come down. And on the 5th hour, Pedro went down, and the accused executed Pedro. Tanga rin itong si Pedro. Bumaba at papatayin kita. Katakot-takot na warning. Sige pa rin, bumaba. Ayan, pinatay. That is not the issue. The issue is whether there is evident premeditation. The Supreme Court said there is none. Because despite the lapse of time, 5 hours, sufficient to reflect. I mean, it is not sufficient to reflect. 5 hours. Why? Because from the circumstances shown, there is no cool reflection, but there was hot reflection. Mainit ang ulo, paikot-ikot. Hot reflection, wag yung sasagot sa bariyan, ha? There was no cool reflection as shown by the circumstances. The accused did not fully meditate the consequences of his act. Evident premeditation. Alright. It is not applicable when there is an aberratio ictus or when there is an error in personae. Why? Kasi it will negate the element of clinging to the criminal resolution. If there is evident premeditation, the person who was contemplated or premeditated to be killed, the crime contemplated to be committed is the same crime committed by the accused. So that if it is a different crime or a different person, then there could be no evident premeditation. Unlike in treachery, it does not matter if there is error in personae or aberratio ictus. Treachery will still be appreciated or present, because if the third person, if the intended victim was not able to avoid the attack, with more reason that the an unknowing third person, innocent third person, will not be able to defend himself. But note, class, that in evident premeditation, it is not necessary that a particular person or the victim should be identified. It is enough that the victim is identifiable. So if the accused would say, tomorrow I will kill any person who will prevent me from going to school. The security guard prevented him from entering the school, and the security guard was executed. There is evident premeditation. In robbery with homicide, it is generally inherent. However, if there is a plan to execute a person that will prevent them from committing robbery, and in fact, the police officer prevented them and the police officers were killed, or the security guard were killed, there is evident premeditation. It is inherent in the crime of adultery inherent in the crime of adultery. Bakit kaya? Ano? Premeditation. If there is a conspiracy, is there evident premeditation? There is evident premeditation, class, if it is an express conspiracy. Express conspiracy where there is a plan and there is a direct evidence that two or more people agreed to commit a crime which was indeed committed. However, if there is merely an implied conspiracy, we could not appreciate the element of the lapse of time because we do not know when the accused planned or decided to commit the crime. That element is one thing if it is merely an implied conspiracy. Di follow? Ayan pag may problem kayo, binigyan kayo ng conspiracy, determine whether that conspiracy is implied or expressed for you to appreciate evident premeditation. It is not absorbed by treachery, I repeat, hence, both of which may be appreciated, in which case, one of them will be qualifying and the other one will be generic in character. Meron tayong one interesting case. People versus comadre. Meron ba nagsabing comadre? People versus comadre. The accused with the use of an explosive, a grenade, killed several people. He threw the grenade while the people were congregating. Alright. How many aggravating circumstances are present? Binato. While they were congregating and they were not afforded any warning. By the way, if there is a warning, would there be still treachery? Pedro, I will kill you tomorrow. And Pedro was killed the following day. Is there treachery? Sabi niyo, no more, sir, because Pedro was already warned, therefore he was afforded the opportunity to defend himself. Wrong. Even if there is a warning, if that warning is useless because the victim was nonetheless killed without any opportunity to defend himself, treachery is still available. Sinabi mo nga kay Pedro, Pedro, I will kill you tomorrow. The following day, while Pedro was sleeping, he was executed. In that case, class, despite the warning, it was useless because nonetheless he was executed without any opportunity to defend himself. What is important, class, is the moment when he was executed, whether or not he was afforded any opportunity to defend himself. Hindi yung binigyan ka nga ng warning, wala ka namang opportunity. In the same way, class, when a grenade is thrown to a group of people, that is also a treachery. According to the Supreme Court, the crime is murder. Murder. But under Article 14, the use of an explosive and other devices that will cause destruction is also aggravating. Use of fire, explosives, etc. is also aggravating. The Supreme Court said the use of explosive is also a separate aggravating circumstance. Use of explosives and treachery. Any of these aggravating circumstances will qualify the crime. But the nearest or more appropriate, said the Supreme Court here, would be the use of explosive, people versus kumadre. And in obiter, may obiter pa tayo, ha? In obiter, the Supreme Court said that if it was alleged that the accused had no license to possess these explosives like a grenade, there would have been an additional aggravating circumstance of illegal possession under Republic Act 8294, amending 1688, PD 1688. In other words, the killing not only is aggravated by an unlicensed firearm, but if explosive is used and the accused is not licensed to possess explosive, that will also be an aggravating circumstance under Republic Act 8294. People versus comadre. Comadre. Pwede pa. Marami pa. Let us talk of a more interesting aggravating circumstance. Medyo pagod na tayo. Let us talk of interesting things. What is this aggravating circumstance? Ha? Ano? Ignominy. Ignominy versus cruelty. Sir, yan yung torifiel. Ano ba yung torifiel? Yan, sir, yung banyambang pag-aari, ilinagyan ng kugon grass. Ano ba yung kugon grass? It is an abrasive leaf or leaves that is abrasive, that can even refine is a wood which was put in the organ of the accused and rape the victim. It will refine a rough surface. Yung kugon grass, ginagamit yun pang-refine. What I cannot understand in that case is the organ to withstand, very sturdy to withstand the effect of the kugon grass. Hindi ko maintindihan. Imagine a kugon grass wrapped on the organ of the accused. Alright. That is not the issue. The issue here is whether it is ignominy or it is cruelty. As far as we are concerned, the Supreme Court clearly distinguished cruelty from ignominy. Cruelty, physical sufferings. Ignominy, moral sufferings. Since cruelty involves physical sufferings, the victim must be alive. On the other hand, ignominy involves moral suffering. The victim must be humiliated. Very clear. What is the test of cruelty? Alright. The test of cruelty is the enjoyment of the accused to inflict additional sufferings, unnecessary sufferings. The accused must enjoy. So, if the victim was fired upon and after firing, the victim fell and he was stabbed subsequently, is there cruelty? Apparently, there is none. Why? Because the subsequent stabbing was not intended or was for the purpose of enjoyment of inflicting additional injury for the victim to suffer. Why was he stopped when he was already shot? To ensure the killing. In other words, the presence of several wounds is not an indication of threat of cruelty. It must be shown that those multiple wounds were inflicted for the suffering of the accused. They are unnecessary for the enjoyment of the accused. Thus, if these 100 wounds inflicted were done simultaneously, there is no cruelty. Simultaneously. But if these 100 wounds were inflicted one by one, with a duration of 1.5 seconds, each wound was inflicted after 0.5 seconds each. Isa, dalawa, 0.5 pa pala eh. Alright. Apparently, obviously, there is now cruelty. The victim was decapitated. His head was cut off. His arms were also cut off and then spread all over Metro Manila. Mirna Castillo, People versus Hunt, hindi ba? Mirna Castillo. Sino ba ang Mirna Castillo? O si Chris Aquino raw? Ay hindi si Lani? Oh, whoever is that. Now, considering that this beheading is already done when the victim was dead, the Supreme Court said that another aggravating circumstance should be appreciated, that of scoffing or outraging the corpse of the victim. This is the only qualifying aggravating circumstance that is committed or that occur after the killing. In People versus Guerrero, the accused had a quarrel with the victim out of jealousy. And in the course of the quarrel, the accused stabbed the victim. And after killing the victim, the accused castrated the victim. Crime committed? Alright, murder. Qualified by scoffing the corpse of the victim. Because after the killing, the victim was castrated. We go back to ignominy. Kasi while we have a clear distinction between ignominy and cruelty, there are some gray areas where, if done in crimes of rape, would be more of a moral suffering than a cruelty, just like in the case of Torifel. There was a later case, this time it is no longer kugon grass ang nilagay sa kanyang organ, banana leaves. At least it is user-friendly than a kugon grass. And still, the Supreme Court said there is ignominy, apparently dependent upon the manner how the rape is committed, that would not constitute cruelty but more of an ignominy. Just like in People versus Silent, where the rape was committed from behind. The manner how the crime was committed is not in accord with the natural mode of sexual intercourse. Natural mode. Meron bang natural mode? Alright. In another case, yung bang there were cigarette blisters in the genitalia of the victim. Blisters. Which initially would tell, oh, that is cruelty. But the Supreme Court ruled ignominy. Ignominy. Which I am saying now because it is a crime of rape, and apparently those acts are more of moral suffering rather than cruelty. Alright, so much with cruelty and ignominy. We take note of this matter of scoffing and outraging, which is also a qualifying but not a generic aggravating circumstance. And then we have this matter of unlawful entry, and that of forcible entry. Forcible involves force or distraction of a part of the building for the accused to gain entry, whereas unlawful entry, the accused uses a means to enter the house through a means which is not intended for the purpose. Entering the house through the window, entering the house through a ceiling, entering the house through an exit door. Tama? No. Even if it is an exit door, it is still a door that may be used for entry or exit. It is only because the user or the owner of that building or house placed therein for exit. That did not change the nature of the door as a place for entry or exit. Porque ba nilagyan mo yan na only exit at you enter there? Oh, there is unlawful entry. No. Because you enter a means which is not intended for purposes of ingress or egress. Alright. This is also class inherent in crimes of robbery with force upon things, but not in robbery with force or intimidation. Aid of armed men, aid of minors, kayang-kaya na ninyo yan, means employed to weaken the defense. It is only intended to weaken the defense but not totally deprive the defense of the victim. That would differentiate it from treachery. But again, as I have said, it will that means will be absorbed by treachery. Craft, fraud, or disguise, okay na kayo dyan. Although Supreme Court apparently would equate craft and fraud. Usually sasabihin lang craft and fraud. Although craft would involve a higher degree of trickery, higher degree compared to a fraud. And disguise simply involve identity of the person. Identity of the person. And finally, before we go home, Article 15. I am afraid baka wala na tayong ma-discuss sa Miyerkules, 15. Alternative circumstances. Instruction, degree of instruction, and then you have this intoxication and relationship. Note the relationship, especially if it is an aggravating circumstance. It must be interpreted strictly against the government. For instance, a step-brother and a step-daughter, a step-sister and a step-brother, they are not covered under the definition of a relationship. Dependent upon the nature of the crime would depend whether it is mitigating or aggravating. In heinous crimes like rapes and homicide or murder, especially murder, they are always aggravating. But in crimes involving robbery, they are mitigating because of the absolutory cause under Article 332, which is an absolutory cause exempting relatives from the crime of theft, malicious mischief, and estafa. In intoxication class, it is not enough that the accused proved that he was intoxicated when he committed the crime. It is necessary that the accused was affected by the intoxication. Because even if he was intoxicated, if he could argue very well. In other words, he was not affected by the effect of the intoxication. Therefore, he cannot be mitigated because his mind was not at all affected. In fact, he becomes more knowledgeable and intelligent as he could better argue when he was drunk. Kaya, one person was driving normally under 100 miles or 100 kilometers per hour. When he got 2 or 3 bottles of beer, he was driving 10 kilometers per hour. When asked, why are you driving so slowly? He said, because I am drunk. Under that circumstance, there is no showing that his drunkenness affected his mind, and therefore it cannot be mitigating. However, class, for purposes of aggravation, it is enough that it is habitual or it was after the plan to commit a crime, subsequent to the plan. And finally, regarding the education, it is not formal education, but the degree of instruction should be equated to the absence or knowledge of the accused, intelligence of the accused, not necessarily illiterate, nor read nor write. If that accused is intelligent enough, he cannot avail of any mitigating circumstance. Of course, high education taken advantage of, that is an aggravating circumstance. Alright, we'll end here, we'll adjourn, and I will see you next meeting. Alright, good afternoon and have a good weekend. Thank you very much.